26th January. It's a public holiday for us.
So 1 second.
We call it the Republic Day.
So 1 second.
No. So we call it the Republic Day, and I think even a school child will tell you this, that 26 January 1950 is when the Constitution of India went into effect, right? Constitution of India, our parliamentary system. We are called a republic because we don't have kings. We have a president. We have elections. We have political parties. But we basically, our sum and substance is that on 26 January, all of India, for the first time perhaps, went into a constitution parliamentary democracy. That's a general belief. Now, in earlier years, I used to debate very ferociously with a lot of people who used to claim to be liberals. Okay? So I used to tell them, hey, see, we have a very ancient democratic tradition. In the Vedic age, we had the concept of a Ganarajya. In the Mahajanapada period, we had the Vaishali and Lichavi republics. In the Chola Empire, we had the Ur and Sabhas. In the Gupta Empire, the Ashtakula Adhikarana. So I said, we have all these examples of democratic elected councils. So how can you say that India's democracy is borrowed from the West? The liberals then would counter. They would say, see, Vaishali was very ancient period, localized. Can that same constitution be applied on an all-India basis, unifying Kashmir to Kanyakumari in the present-day complexities of India? So when we talk of a dharmic constitution, can we really have a dharmic constitution today based on our ancient Vedic knowledge? So then I started researching, seeing that do we actually have a live example of such a dharmic constitution in our ancient history? And this is what I found. I found that not only do we have a dharmic constitution, we have a dharmic constitution unifying all of India in a republican structure, in a parliamentary structure, years before the American War of Independence, years before the French Republic, and years before the British parliamentary reform. So what we have is not just the first Republic of India, we have the first Republican national state anywhere in the world. And this government or this state was called the Karbhari Sarkar. Okay? The word Karbhari comes from the word Karya, which is basically action, and Bhar is basically responsibility. So people who take the responsibility to act in government, that's the executive, they call the Karbhari Sarkar is the government. Can you go to the next slide, please? Now, just to ask a question, how many of you have heard of Mountbatten? Great. How many of you have heard of Akbar, the Mughal emperor? Fantastic. How many of you have heard of Nana Fadnis? Right? Yeah. So we celebrate. The second. Yes. So we celebrate 26 January, okay, as our Republic Day. 4 days later, on 30th January, it was this very personality called Nana Fadnis who envisaged an all-India Dharmic Republic, okay, based on parliament and based on election system. Now, this is not rhetoric, this is not a WhatsApp forward. How did I find this out? What are the evidences, etc.? So I first started researching on the. I'm sorry?
I'll give you a mic.
Oh, okay. Oh, I'm very sorry. I'm very sorry. Okay. So I first started reading on the 18th century history. Now, most historians, unfortunately, when they talk about the 18th century, they refer to British records, the British, I would say, the British residency records, or the Farsi records, and that is how the 18th century is defined. So 18th century is generally defined as a period of anarchy. There are different regional states. There's a Carnatic war. There are Marathas. There are Sikhs. There are Rajputs. A lot of fighting going on. There's Battle of Plassey, Battle of Buxar, and then the British rule kind of comes into India, right? So I said, why don't I start reading regional literature from this period, okay? And since my interest was in Maratha history, I started reading a group of primary Marathi sources from this period, 1750 to 1800, okay? Now, there are three kinds of such sources. Okay, one are called the daftars. So we see state papers, communications, actually eyewitness accounts, letters written between different statesmen. These are recorded together in what is called as daftars. Okay. Secondly, there were people in that time who wrote down what they witnessed in terms of small historical novelettes. These were called Bakhars. There are people who wrote news, like just like we have media today, they used to write news and used to write newsletters. Okay, these were called Hakikats. So all these, so reading through 417 such state papers, daftars, bakhars, and the different, I would say, Hakikats, I came across this very fantastic kind of government, okay, this fantastic kind of, I would say, republican kind of state, which also had a lot of military and political achievements to it. Secondly, I cross-checked this with English, Portuguese, and Persian records. So we can go down. So we find that in 1786, a British officer in his dispatch says that the government of which is there in Pune is a very different kind of government than other Asiatic governments. It has a lot of similarities with the British parliamentary system, but somehow there are also things which are different. Around the same time, W.H. Palmer, under British President, writes that the form of government which is prevalent here, that is in India and under the Maratha rule, a person who was a nobody yesterday can become a leader today. Now, I correlated this with the French records. So there's a French diplomat at that time called Monsieur Montaigne. So Monsieur Montaigne writes that, in the famous translated papers of Vijay Hatkar, he writes that the form of negotiation of this form of government is very different in the sense that every single point of a treaty has to be passed by majority in a council. Unlike France, where Louis XVI used to pass it by executive order. So this piqued my interest. I mean, two people, English and French, are saying that something different happening here. This is around 1774, years before the American War of Independence, years before the French Revolution, etc. So that's when I kind of got interested in it. I got interested in Nana Fadnis and the Karlbhai Sarkar. So what I'll do is I'll start off with just talking about 10 myths which we generally have late 18th century history. I'll give a short story, very short story, on how this republic came to be formed, who are the main founders of it, what was their vision, and why did they get that vision, you know. And finally, I'll just maybe have a comparison between the First Republic and the Western Republics. Before I jump into that, why is this very important for us, all of us, you know, all Indians today? If you go to the next slide, please. Firstly, this form of government not only envisaged a unified India under a, I would say, democratic kind of setup, it also revived several ancient Vedic institutions. The Ghatika tradition, which was prevalent in Nalanda, Kanchipuram, in Takshashila, etc., was revived on a national scale by this particular form of government. A lot of temple restorations, which are very invisible today across India, from Rameshwaram right up to Badri Ashiram, are actually engaged by this particular form of government. Militarily, this government defeated the British not once or twice, but 7 consecutive times, and dealt shattering blows on it. In battles such as the Battle of Sibri-Collares, the British suffered 2,200 casualties. In the Battle of Chowk Barwai, 3 regiments of the British were dissolved, and the British suffered 1,500 casualties as per the Indian records, and 417 casualties as their own records. So these were shattering blows. In no other battles, including in the Napoleonic Wars, was such massive defeats suffered by the British. And no, this was not by Tipu Sultan, etc., etc., etc. This is by these guys whom we hardly haven't heard of, right? Then we often talk about our history is generally linear. Okay, so we had the great Chola Empire, then the Pandyas kind of came in, then we had the Delhi Sultanate and the Mughals, and finally the British. But what we don't realize is that the British took over India not from the Mughal Empire. The British took over India from this government, and I would say largely the Maratha Empire, and I'll see how it is connected to the Marathas. Because on December 1st, 1784, the entire Mughal administration, the entire administration of Delhi, after 650 years of foreign rule, that was considered impossible for any indigenous Indian power to rule Delhi, for any dharmic power to rule Delhi. After 650 years, lock, stock and barrel, the entire administration was surrendered by the Mughal Emperor Shah Alam to one of the great generals of this government. And that is something which we all need to be aware of. Especially when we go ahead in our present quest on what kind of country we want our nation to be. So, just quickly go into what are the myths we have of 18th century history. Now, can any of you name just one battle between the British and Indians? Any one battle which you have heard of? Any one battle? Battle of Buxar, Battle of Plassey. Okay, Battle of Kirby. All battles, generally, which in history we kind of read, are battles we lost. I think I would come back to what Mr. Vikram Sampath. How many of us have heard of Battle of Chowk Barwai? The chief commander of the British East India Company at that time, called Goddard, who was one of the most decorated military generals in the 18th century in Britain, had to run in disguise, ordering a flight without discharge in this battle. How many of us have heard of Battle of Shivpuri Kolaris? Battle of Vadgaon, in which 6,000 British soldiers and the Allies surrendered and became prisoners of war. They were escorted to Bombay by the Indian troops. So that's a myth. So the late 18th century was not a period of anarchy. In fact, a very celebrated author has written a book called Anarchy. And a lot of us have also read about that. So the late 18th century was not a period of anarchy, it was a period of national reunification under the Karbhai Sarkar. Okay. Second myth we have is that the only all India empires we had after, so Maurya, Gupta, Chola, then we had all the foreigners like Mughals or then the British who kind of unified us. That's not true. This particular empire spanned over 2.8 million square kilometers. Modern day India's area is 3.2 million square kilometers from the Sindhu to the Kaveri. Okay, go next please. I won't get into very technical, there are a lot of technical matters in terms of Maratha history in which a lot of Maratha historians debate, and I won't get into that for this particular, I would say, session. You can find that in my book. Second, under kind of myth which is made is that 18th century India was a feudal society. Women had no rights, there was sati, there were all these bad things, caste system, everything was there. So we were such a dormant society, British came, that's why we couldn't fight them and then went off. Again a myth. As you will see, one of the first gender-sensitive police reforms in I would say world history particularly, even today in the 21st century we're talking about gender sensitivity in police reforms in the West. Here they actually had a law and a constitutional covenant enacted. Civil military separation. Again, we have a constitutional document of covenant. I will actually show some of the snaps of the manuscripts in this. And also the separation of the judiciary and the executive. Okay, so there are just a zillion things of this government we don't even know of. I had to read about 800 such kind of manuscript papers. There are far more. In fact, there's a very, I would say, in Bharat Itihas Sanshodhak Mandal, which is an institution in Pune, they are no less than 1 crore papers, according to a person who is convening that. So I just said 800 and you have so many. So you can understand how much more. So Indian history, no, doesn't suffer from a lack of information. It does suffer from a lack of research. Go next. Finally, the biggest myth we have is that democratic republicanism has arisen in the West. I think we have anyway disputed that. We have, let's say, our Vedic Ganrajya, we have our Vaishali, we have our Ichavi, whatever. But also from a modern context, relevant to us, we also have the Karbhai Sarkar, which had a lot of these so-called liberal provisions in the Indian context. Now, how do they do it in the Indian context? How do they interpret the Vedic Shastras, the Smritis, etc., to actually establish its constitution? That's what we'll see going ahead, basically. Going next. Okay, so just to give a very short background, this is just an ABC of Maratha history before the Karbhai Sarkar. So, Chhatrapati Shivaji Maharaj was coronated in 1674. So, he established this Swarajya. Surajya, Swayam Rajya, our Rajya, okay, a good Rajya. Okay. After his death, there were a lot of ups and downs in the Maratha Empire. Around the early 18th century, the prime ministers or the Peshwas took over de facto control. One of the great heroes of the Peshwas, Thorle Bajirao, actually campaigned and extended the empire across India. In fact, he also successfully attacked Delhi. After him, there was his son who was also very famous, Peshwa Nana Sahib or Balaji Bajirao. We had a battle called the Battle of Panipat in 1761, in which Ahmad Shah Abdali, an Afghan invader, in conjunction with certain Mughal Sardars such as Rohila Najibullah, there was a great battle, and I think it's a very famous kind of battle. where there was a tactical defeat for the Marathas in that particular period. The Maratha Empire, however, revived under another young Peshwa called Peshwa Thorle Madhavrao. And the Marathas again reached up to Delhi, but unfortunately, this Peshwa died young. Okay, he died about 1772, just when the Marathas were on the cusp of, let's say, consolidating the hold in Delhi and North India. So basically, we come to 1773, where a dynamic Peshwa has died. His younger brother, who is just a teenager called Narayan Rao, has ascended the throne. Now, there is a plot or a great conspiracy by his uncle, who is called Raghunath Rao, to dethrone Narayan Rao. This leads to a ghastly murder. So Raghunath Rao is responsible. There is a huge story behind that, which is there in my book. But murders Narayan Rao Peshwa, and he becomes a Peshwa himself. Now, all this would have been history. All this would have been something we all know: kings fight, succession, there are wars over succession, etc. If not for one man. This man was not a military general. This man was not a minister. He was a judge. Okay, today we talk about Supreme Court, High Court, judges, etc. This judge, the Nyayadhish of the Maratha Empire, was Sri Ram Shastri. In an unprecedented move, never heard of. Perhaps I don't know if there's any other historical incident of this. Ram Shastri commenced a legal proceeding, a case against a sitting Peshwa, who was a sitting ruler. So imagine if you had a Prime Minister of India, and some judge says that I am commencing a murder investigation and a kind of case against the sitting Prime Minister of India. So Ram Shastri kind of had this entire verdict despite all obstacles, saw the witnesses, saw the saksha, and concluded that Peshwa Raghunath Rao was a murderer and passed a verdict of death sentence against him. Now, imagine, he's a sitting Peshwa. How could he pass a death sentence against a sitting Peshwa? So obviously it wasn't implemented, and Ram Shastri, the ethical person that he was, he said, since this is my justice, and this justice which is as per the Nyaya, okay, and which is as per the dictates of Nyaya Murti, it's not being performed, I will go on self-exile. So he went on self-exile. Next slide, please. So we come to a situation where there is a sitting Peshwa, there is a verdict against him, okay. Now on your left-hand side, you find Nana Fadnis. That is a picture of Nana Fadnis, the person I was talking about. So in this administration, okay, there was the person who was a chancellor or the head of the finance and accounts, you can call it in modern days, called Nana Fadnis. Now Fadnis is actually comes from what Fadnishi. Now Nana was actually a very brilliant prodigy. At the age of 14, he joined the Fadnishi. He was very good in Ganita. He was not a military person. In fact, in his autobiography, and this is very significant, one of the rare autobiographies we have of any 18th century Indian personality is actually of Nana Fadnis. He was a great scholar in Vedanta, all the forms of Vedanta, Advaita, Vishtadvaita, and the Madhava school. And his autobiography actually starts with an explanation of Vedanta. Can you believe that? I mean, a political statesman starting with that. But keeping that aside, so Nana Fadnis basically was the chancellor or the head of finance and accounts at that particular point of time. Now, Nana Fadnis felt that we need a different kind of system, okay, a different system based on our ancient traditions, which will end this fratricide, which will end this, I would say, the mutual distrust which exists, and have a stable government which takes forward the vision of Chhatrapati Shivaji Maharaj and Thorle Bajirao. Okay, what was the vision of Nana Fadnis? Why did he get into this? We have a live eyewitness account of this, or I would say a live primary source from that period. So a few years later, a great Bakharkar or a historian called Balaji Ganesh Chitnis wrote about what was the vision which animated Nana Fadnis. So I'll just read this out. This is actually from the actual manuscript, and then I'll translate it. पूर्वी पांडवांना श्रीकृष्ण परमात्मा प्रत्यक्ष सांगून त्याने दैत्य दानव पृथ्वीचे विलास मिळून दान धर्म आदान केला. त्या अलीकडे नर्मदेपासून पलीकडे उत्तरेस सम्राट विक्रम राजा व अलीकडे शनिवाहन शककर्ते झाले. त्या अलीकडे नानासाहेबांनी महाराजांनी रामेश्वरापासून इंद्रप्रस्थापावते शत्रु पराक्रमित करून देव ब्राह्मण प्रजापालन व दान धर्माची कीर्ती कलियुगी विख्यात केली. 3 or 4 very important points, media. Kaliyug. We all have this fatalist notion that we are in Kaliyug. Morals are going down, nothing will happen, we have no hope. Okay. So first and foremost, we said even in Kaliyug, a Dharma Rajya is possible. And how do we? And what is the inspiration for Dharma Rajya? We start with Sri Krishna Paramatma. So in the Kurukshetra war, so the Kurukshetra war is generally considered to be the boundary line between the Kali Yuga and the previous Yuga. So Sri Krishna established a dharmic government for the Hindu Pandavas, and Yudhishthira established a Dharma Rajya. After him, as per Nana Fadnis's vision, pan-Indian emperors such as Samrat Vikramaditya and Samrat Shalivahan, so all those who are acquainted with Itihasa will know these are great emperors from them, they restored this form of government. So it is on to us, and Chhatrapati Shivaji Maharaj took the title Chhatrapati, which is a Chakravarti. It was not just a Raja Maharaja. It's on to us to revive this ancient dharma on a scale across all Bharatvarsha. So we have to see that Kali Yuga is not a Yuga of lost hope. It is a Yuga of also glory. We can reverse this trend. So Nana Fadnis was me, how do I kind of get this form of government done? On your right hand side, we have one of the most phenomenally winning leaders of our 18th century called Parvati Bai. Now, unfortunately, in Bollywood, Parvati Bai has been reduced to just a heroine and a wife of a great warrior called Sadashiv Rao. But in reality, Parvati Bai was one of the great political thinkers of the 18th century. So, Parvati Bai actually, as per another Bakhar called the Narayan Rao Peshwanchi Bakhar, which is again written at this period, Parvati Bai tells Nana Fadnis, why don't four of you come together instead of one person? चार मुत्सदी आहे, चार एकत्र येऊन राज करावे. Why don't many of you, four is just a kind of term, but Lord, why don't many of you, instead of depending on one person, why don't many people who are very popular come together and form a government? Now, Nana Fadnis already had a conceptual and philosophical kind of, I would say, background onto this. So then Nana Fadnis said, yes, why don't we try this out? But how does he reach out to all people across India, right? He's in Pune, he has to reach out to Tamil Nadu, Karnataka, Punjab, Kashmir, all people have to agree with him, etc. So Nana Fadnis said, let's try a pilot project out. Okay, so in October, so generally this is a festival season. You have Dashara, you have Diwali, etc. Lot of Indian families celebrate together. So they generally go to temples, there are feasts, there are pujas, etc. So Nana Fadnis, I would say the solution is simple, the pilot project is simple, that during these festivals, we will assemble all the families together and ask each family two things. Number one, each one will take Ganga Jal, each one will take Tulsi. We'll ask them two things. Number one, are you happy with what's happening in this government? If not, give us two names whom you think will better the situation. Okay, why two names? Because every family will put its own member forward. So they should have an alternative name which is not from your family. So like this, 25 prominent families are first collected. And when I say family, it is not just a nuclear family of today. It includes Mama, Mami, Paripa, Parima, whatever, the entire kind of lot. So I about 30, 40, 50 people in each family. Okay. So within this, they then counted all the alternate names, not the first name, the alternate names, right? Because first name I can always put my own son, my own daughter, or somebody's name forward. So alternate names are counted, and out of these alternate names is selected 11 elected people. So as you can see on the first kind of election, 11 people, and one person was specifically selected called Sakaram Baku Dogun, who was a right hand side second right, who was just there for him because he was politically a very strong personality at that point of time. So these 12 people, 11 elected and one nominated or selected, came to be known as a Bar Bhai, okay, or the Great Council of 12, and this was a form of shadow government of Nana Fadnis. So this was the first experiment. Okay. Now, obviously, the Peshwa still ruling. You have had this kind of conversation with a lot of these families. Word is going to come out, and obviously, this is going to be some kind of a revolution. So, the next step of Nana Fadnis was to organize a revolution, which we call the Purandar Revolution. The revolution succeeded, and Pune was captured on 30th January 1774, and formally the Republic or the Barbhai Sarkar, which later became Karbhai Sarkar, was declared. Now, this is only the first step. Question is, how do I now spread this idea across India? Here now Parvati Bai played a very, very important role. As per the Narayan Rao Peshwanchi Bakhar, Parvati Bai herself wrote a letter. Okay, they actually say Yavi, Shikikotar, different, and her coin, her sikka, etc. But she wrote a letter, and with these and with agents, sent them all across India. So some of the agents came to Tanjavur, the Kaveri Valley. Some went to Nargund in Karnataka. Some went to Vashi, etc. And they said that we would like to expand this thing. So just like families, okay, were taken into confidence in Pune, families all across a wider geographical region could be taken to say whom do you think is the best person who would kind of cover. Okay. So now we have a situation where around 1774 we have these different agents spreading. The Peshwa has been dethroned, but he still has power in large parts of the country. He goes and takes the help of the British. Okay, and that's how the British intervene, and we have the Great War which happens. In the meantime, Nana Fadnis lays down two foundations. He realizes that now we are an incipient kind of government, despite us talking about all the ancient traditions, etc. We know what we know our society. Humans are humans. They may not support us. So how do we establish institutions? So two very famous covenants come. You see, on the person on your second left is one of the greatest commanders and military generals of India called Mahaji Shinde. Now, Mahaji Shinde belonged to a provincial dynasty which ruled over central India called the Shindes. I mean, it's a very ancient dynasty. Again, I won't get too much into detail in this. But Mahaji Shinde was a very prominent military general at that time. So, Nana Fadnis engaged in a parlance with Mahaji Shinde in 1775 and signed a convention. What did this convention say? This convention told him, you look after the military, okay, you have complete freedom in that, but the executive will have certain strategic direction over you. So things coming to, let's say, administrative, finance, things coming to home, etc. That will remain with us, but the military is completely under your control. So what we call today as a military executive separation. We have a convention, again documented in our daftars regarding that. Second point, this whole, I would say this whole episode started by a Nyayadhish, Ram Shastri, right? So the first step of Nana Fadnis was actually calling Ram Shastri back. However, Ram Shastri was stickler to procedure. He said, I will not come back if again I'm going to have a murder, I'm again going to have, such fights which are happening. So a separate convention was signed with Ram Shastri, assuring and taking the oath, okay, testifying judicial independence. Now, if I may just read a very small, I would say, segment from one of the Bakhars. So on 26th of September 1774, we have a documented convention which signs. So in which all the leaders of this Bar Bhai, okay, signed by four of the prominent leaders, Haripant, Nana Fadnis, Sakaram Bapu Bokal and Trayambak Rao Mama, take an oath to Ram Shastri that come what may, we will not interfere in the judiciary, and if suppose there's a case against us, we will recuse ourselves from it. ये इसी संशय न धरता आपण ही शपथपूर्वक विश्वास मिळवून आमची अगर व्यवहारात चार मातबर आहे त्यांची भीड न धरता न्याय करून दिलगेस लावत जावे. Please do not even take a slightest, I would say, tension in your mind that we would be involved or will not be involved. We assure you by the oath of God that we would assure independence. Now, this was much before this is much before the Supreme Court of the United States was established. That's about 12 years later. And much before the Judicial Separation Act in Britain was kind of launched in the 19th century. I'll come to that later. So we have these two things happening. Go next slide, please. Now there are a lot of interesting intrigues, etc., which is there in my book, which you can kind of read. So just quickly recapitulating whatever I said. November 1773 for formation of a shadow government. January 30th, 1774, capture of Pune by the Colombian revolutionaries. February 1774, there was a public outreach. So agents went all across India, different parts, trying to get the support. September 1775, covenant of the civil military separation. 1779 is the different administrative and political reforms. So the council was widened, etc. Go next. These are some of the source materials. The original actually what is called a Modi script. That is a separate script which was used at that time. These are Devanagari translations of them. There are a lot of institutions you have in Maharashtra which preserve them. Bharat Itihas Sankshodak Mandal is one. We have a Deccan College manuscript section which is other. Many of these are mentioned in my book. Go next, please. You have French and English writers also who mention about this government. Specifically, that's so different than what is the and how it compares to, let's say, the parliamentary and the other forms of government. Go next, please. How does it compare with the other founding Western nations in terms of democracy, etc.? So let's compare it with two other of the first republics of the West. Okay, first we compare it with the French First Republic, and then with the United States. Britain, I'll compare it with Britain separately. because that's slightly different. So firstly, here we had an electorate based on popular respected families. Importantly, women and men had the same rights. So in the West, adult suffrage, especially women's suffrage took a long time, 150 years. Here women had, in fact, Parvati Bai gave 4 candidates. She was old with 2 candidates, as Narayana Peshwaji Bhakar, she gave 4 candidates. Equal vote in each family association, lot of people from all communities, as per the records, 66.86% of the people who participated came from what you call the non-upper castes, Adivasi, Shepherds, Dhankar, other communities. 9% were Muslims. All other, only the other section, over about 20% belong to the other castes. So you can see it was a widely spread. We have actual examples of, for example, the Koli Rajas of Jabhar. We have the Patkari kind of community. But there are many of those, I won't go into detail of them, but a large segment of the population was being represented. In the first French Republic, which was formed in 1792, only 1/3 of the seats were elected, and the Electoral College of these 1/3 seats were restricted to 30,000 votes, which was based on census suffrage. That is, a French nobleman gets a 1 vote, a French non-nobleman, the landowner, gets half a vote, and a French landless guy gets 0 votes. In the Carmel Sector, there is no such thing like that. 1787 in United States, due to great elections of 1788-89, the Philadelphia Convention of 1787, only 5 of the 13 states actually voted. Among those 5 states which voted, only white property owning males, that is 6% of the population, got a right to vote. Okay, and we are talking about 1787, 1792 to 1774. Executive government, a council of 12 executive members, which later expanded further, so that functioned like a mini parliament. In first government funds 5 members directly, and in the 18th century United States, there was a cabinet based on presidential system. Head of state, we have 3 symbolic head of states, Chhatrapati, Peshwa, and the Prithvipati. We'll come to that later. And process selection, there was not only that the executive selected in 1796 when Peshwa Savai Malavira died, as per the Kharjanchi Bakhat, there was also an electoral college faced for the Peshwa's post itself, which is proposed by Nana Fadnas. I'll again come to that later. Next slide, please. So there are a lot of, I would say, zillion things about this, I would say, government, and you can read that further in my book. I won't get too much into detail of it, but just too many constitutional covenants. Next slide. Method of election to parliament, constitutional provisions, covenants, etc. So, just next slide. But I go rather to the 4 major achievements of the Bhai Sarkar and then wrap up, because I know it's also your lunchtime. Firstly, the victory against British. I think this should really be heralded again and again and again, because this was a victory and a battle not just fought in Maharashtra, but fought all across India. You'll see in Bundelkhand, you'll see Maharashtra, you will see in somewhere in Govindpur and the borders of Bengal and Orissa, etc. So there have been 7 major battles. So I said that since Raghunath Rao escaped, and this is the infant republic, right? So the Peshwa wanted his power back, and since he wanted his power back, he asked the British for help. So the British intervened. The British strategy was very clear: we will liberate Pune. This is so they liberate Pune and reinstate who was a murderous autocrat, but against the kind of a democratic system. So this is what began what historians call the First Anglo-Maratha War. Okay, I'll just quickly go through the names of the battles. The details can be found in the book. So firstly, Battle of Arras. Singular point, the entire British Grenadier Company was wiped out with in this battle. So it's a kind of very famous battle. And all of us who read about Battle of Plassey and Battle of Buxar, especially military historians, should read this Battle of Arras, because the British believed that they had firearms, they had a very disciplined manpower, they could kind of overall large masses of Indian, let's say Indian armies. Battle of Arras destroyed the myth. Next. Campaigns of Bundelkhand, under brilliant guerrilla-style campaign, which was kind of led by 2 brothers called the Kher brothers. Again, details are there in my book. Again, a British force of 7,000 infantry was trapped in a master ambush kill zones. So they trapped they kind of besieged the British force, trapped them in the monsoons, and then a large part of the British force was completely decimated, wiped out, both from a frontal attack and from the climatic conditions. Next slide, please. The first Boer Ghat campaign. So this is the famous Battle of Vadgaon. This is substantially well known. Here, an entire British force of 3,400, along with the Allies, 6,000 British soldiers are made prisoners of war and escorted unceremoniously back. Next slide, please. Yeah, next slide. Next slide. In Battle of Malangarh, a battle which was fought in a mountainous terrain, in one of the cream of the British troopers participated in this battle. In a single encounter, British suffered 75 casualties, while the Sarkar's casualties were 3. So all those who say that the British were very well trained, they have very good firearms, etc., it's 3 versus 75. Next slide. Battle of Chowk Barwai, one of the battles we should know about, where one of the most decorated officers of the British East India Company were destroyed. So, entire regiments were completely dissolved. That's called the Battle of Chowk Barwai. Next. Next slide. Campaign of Shivpuri Kolaras. So our great General Maji Shinde, whom I had mentioned earlier, who was now the Commander-in-Chief of the Karbhai Sarkar for the delivery angle, launched a counter-offensive. Okay, because his own territories in Malwa were under attack. So this led to what is called the Battle of Shivpuri Kolaras. British suffered in a single battle 2,200 casualties, which is one of the highest casualty rate of British in any campaign in India. That is the thing about the battles with Tipu Sultan. But here, in terms of the period and in terms of, let's say, the force which was facing, so it was equally matched. So it was not that the Indians outnumbered the British. It was about 10,000 troops in terms of Maharji and about 8,000, 9,000 in terms of British. So again, a very famous victory of the Indians here. Next slide. And finally, a counter-offensive by Balaji Vishwanath Phatak, again, which actually broke the British naval supply lines also. It broke a lot of the ports which the British had. So the British often prided themselves of having a very strong naval arm. Okay, so this broke that that strategy of the British. Next slide. Okay, so what is the end result of all this? So the end result of the first Anglo-Maratha war is what is called the Treaty of Salbai. Now this is a well-documented treaty in several of our textbooks. But what is not documented is what is the main point of the Treaty of Salbai. The main point of the Treaty of Salbai is that the British agreed to withdraw completely from Delhi politics for the foreseeable future. So this is such a sensational achievement that the British, after Battle of Buxar, who had actually had the Mughal Emperor as their pensioner, completely withdrew from Delhi. The Mughal Emperor became a complete, I would say, in the mercy of the Karbhai Sarkar. So a complete reversal of fortune of the British. They came back to the position where they were in 1757. This reversal of 30 years is not talked about in our textbooks, but that is the Treaty of Salbai. Next slide, please. These are some of the references. They are also there in my book. Next slide. Okay. Now, what Nana Fadnis and Maji Shinde etc. realized is after the victory of the British, if the whole of Bharatvarsh had to really come under this form of government, something spectacular had to be shown. Okay, if that thing spectacular had to be shown, then the ancient cities of India, Indraprastha, Kashi, Hastinapura, had to be liberated from the rule of the Yavanas or the rule of the foreign rulers. So this came. Now the earlier Peshwas had launched campaigns against Delhi, but there was no permanent annexation or permanent conquest. Now what Nana Fadnis and Maji Shinde envisaged was a permanent annexation of the entire north. They called this as the Uttara Digvijaya. So the campaign in the south, just like Chhatrapati Shivaji Maharaj had Dakshina Digvijaya, here we have what is called the Uttara Digvijaya. Just like Samudragupta in the past or Rajendra Chola who went up to the Ganga, we have a Uttara Digvijaya. So this sensational military campaign, I think was both backed by covert and overt means. So Nana Fadnis developed a very extensive intelligence network which played one faction against the other. Next slide. We played one faction against the other, okay, and we have detailed information of the Secret Service reports in what is called the Himne Daftar, okay. So a big family of Maratha which serve called Himne Daftar. So they played exact Chanakya niti, just like Chanakya, what you call unified India in the 4th century BC with Chandragupta Maurya. Similarly, the Chanakya niti being applied, different factions being played against each other, and a final strike was launched on the Dashara day, on Vijayadashmi day after the Shastra Puja, across the Vindhyas, across the Narmada, straight in a blitzkrieg. Finally, this blitzkrieg ended in what is called a Battle of Rootbas. In Mughals and the faction or a Turani faction which was dominating the Mughals was completely defeated. And on December 1st, 1784, in a public darbar in Agra, Shah Alam surrendered all titles, Vakil Mutalak, Mir Bakshi, Amir Hamza, the entire titles, lock, stock, and barrel to Mahaji Shinde, the representative of the Republic. He was allowed for this to continue as a titular ruler, but even there, as we see in a separate letter in 1789, was a transitional period, and we'll come to that later. So he was allowed to continue for the time being as a puppet ruler, but the entire administration was taken over by this government, and an immediate investigation was launched into different jagirs, the zameens, and a different kind of, I would say, wealth of the different Mughal nobles and the jagirdars. So this, I would say, conquest of Delhi, the conquest of the ancient Indraprasth, and in all their letters, they call Delhi as Indraprasth. In fact, I just read out actual letter, right? Rameshwar Pasu Indraprasthapod. So they call it as Indraprasth. So the ancient, again, we're seeing a great revival of the ancient Itihasa traditions was being attempted here. Next slide. So there are different milestones here, how they establish law and order, how they face a lot of problems. British tried to intervene, the Afghans tried to intervene. So despite all that, there were several battles fought, several fierce engagements fought. But still they managed to administer Delhi at least for the next 20 years. So for 25 years, we have an actual evidence of an indigenous power based on Dharmic constitution ruling over Delhi. Next slide. You can see your references in my book. Next slide. Now, obviously, when such a sensational event happens, right, that after 650 years, you have Indian indigenous power taking over Delhi, no longer Mughals, no longer Lodhis, no longer Tughlaqs, no longer Khiljis, no longer anybody, then obviously this creates a great tremor across the world. It's created a tremor in Afghanistan also. Taimur Shah Abdali, the son of Ahmad Shah Abdali, felt that his influence was waning out and launched multiple massive invasions of India. In 1787-88, 120,000 soldiers of the Afghans crossed the Khyber Pass to come into India to intervene. Okay, and obviously tilt the scales. Next slide. However, Mahaji Shinde or Karwai Sarkar got into a pact with the Sikhs who are then ruling over Punjab, the Sikh missiles, and the influence of the Sarkar was expanded over Punjab. And together, through their tactics, Taimur Shah Abdali was completely outwitted and defeated. How he was defeated, what are the different skirmishes, how did they attack, it's all there in my book. I won't get too much in detail. But this defeat was so bad, that in 1791, a representative of the Karwai Sarkar went to Kabul. His name was Wajuddin. And Taimur Shah Abdali said, I'm willing to be your Mansabdar. Mansabdar means your tributary chief. I will give you 10,000 soldiers. Please don't attack at me. Please don't cross the Khyber Pass and attack me. I'm willing to be your Mansabdar. In 1791, also, importantly, the gates of Somnath, which were at Ghazni, were returned and explicitly asked and returned to the Karwai Sarkar. So that humiliation which Mohammed Ghori had put on Bharatvarsh for over thousands of years, that was reversed. Now, there's often a myth that in Amritsar you have the gates of Somnath, which was brought by the first British Anglo-Afghan War. That gates were deemed to be not authentic by both the priests of Somnath and the other priests of any other temple. On the other hand, the gates of which Mahaji Shinde had brought back are still there in the Gopal Mandir in Ujjain. And even though the priests of Somnath did not accept it, there were other technical reasons for that. They did not deny its authenticity. So that's a very important point which we often forget and don't read in our books. Again, I won't go into too much detail. A lot of battles, a lot of skirmishes. It's brilliant. In fact, there's an entire book I said on the Secret Service, the way they actually step by step. In fact, there are two very interesting, I would say, covert operations which were launched. One which hit the King of England himself, and the other which hit the court of Kabul, which is both are there in the Hingne Daftar. In the first, covert operatives of the Karwai Sarkar are there in Kabul and in Tehran, and they actually find out that the king of Kabul is in a war with the king of Iran. Okay, and they say that this is a right time to attack. If you want to attack right now, let's say these positions, the Afghans, etc., right time to attack is in this period because they're going to be in a war with Iran, and most of the forces are going to go west. a brilliant kind of letter by Shankarji Pant, okay, written to Shivram Yadav, who was a deputy of Purushottam Hingne, who was then in Delhi. But it's one of the covert operations. Second covert operations was when Hingne, who was the resident diplomat in charge of the intelligence operations all across North, writes to Nana Fadnis saying that Warren Hastings, so he was one of the British Governor Generals who was a big opponent of the Sarkar. The letter between Warren Hastings and King of England, which is scandalous, because there was a lot of money which was owed by Warren Hastings to King of England, and Warren Hastings said, no, I won't pay up because of certain blackmail. This letter was intercepted by the Sarkar Secret Service and leaked out to the merchants of Kolkata. And we have a letter of this in the Hingne Daftar. So brilliant code. You can just understand, we're just reading about a letter, but what they would have actually done to get that information, right? It's today, in today's world, it would be classified intelligence information. So brilliantly, this kind of wars are fought. Next slide, please. So after all these multiple achievements, I think a very important thing is on the cultural and civilizational renewal. This is what I want to really focus on before I kind of close. So there are a lot of details in my book. You could read about that. Next slide, please. Yeah, this is the Gopal Mandir where the gates of Somnath are there, even today. Next. Yeah. So I would like to really pause here. A lot of people know about Punyashlok Devi Ahilyabai Holkar. In fact, there's also a TV serial right now on it. But a lot of people don't know that Punyashlok Ahilyabai Devi Holkar was one of the key forces in unifying the Karbhari Sarkar. So let's not forget, we had here not one person, but 12 people ruling. Okay, and later on, many more people ruling. So you need a moral figure who will sort out the small disagreements you have. Because obviously it will be there. When there are many people ruling, they have to take a decision. Majority matters, consensus matters. How do you take such a decision? So really, in that role of a matriarch was played by Punyashlok Devi Ahilyabai Holkar. She was also singularly responsible for a huge temple, I would say, and welfare regeneration across Bharatvarsha. So the Kashi Vishweshwar temple is a classic example of one of the temples restored. The Somnath temple was restored. Next slide, please. There are, I would say, no less than 175 temples, tanks, irrigation works, etc., which I have listed in my book. There are many, many more, but which I have listed in my book. Importantly, also welfare houses for the poor. Now, you will not believe this, but Punyashlok Devi Ahilyabai Holkar built 6 dharamshalas, not in Delhi or here, but in the Badri Himalayas at 14,000 feet. Okay, it was snow. Imagine 12 dharamshala. What is a dharamshala where you can come and stay? And each of dharamshalas, a blanket was given to the person who would come and stay. So imagine a traveler there, traveling in the icy Himalayas. He wants to go and pray to his gods, etc. He comes to a dharamshala established by Punyashlok Devi Ahilyabai and by the Sarkar. He gets a blanket, he gets food, and he feels warm. And that's why dharma is not divorced from welfare. Dharma is divorced from economic regeneration. And one final word before I kind of the Ghatika traditions of India. This is what I spoke about earlier. Now we had Nalanda, Kanchipuram, Takshashila, etc. The great universities of India, right? Unfortunately, they suffered a lot of pillage during the great invasions which happened. When Bakhtiyar Khilji attacked Nalanda, it was left burning for days and days together. Takshashila was completely destroyed by the Ghaznavid and Ghurid invasions. Now, a lot of kings, and I would say every king invested in building Gurukuls, Ved Pathshala, etc. But the Karbhari Sarkar went one step further. They had a festival or they had an event called a Shravana Ramanna. Every year in the month of Shravan, 40,000 Vedic scholars in Vedanga, Jyotisha, Vyakarna, different sciences and arts would assemble in Pune and would be evaluated in the ancient Ghatika traditions. What do I mean by Ghatika traditions? A Dwarapalaka system. So in the ancient Ghatikas, they used to have what is called Dwarapalakas. In the Dwaras, in the gates, there will be a very renowned scholar who will kind of examine you. It's like an entrance examination, IIT, JEE, etc., or whatever you can call it in the modern day parlance. So in this system, these 40,000 scholars from Kanchipuram, Sringeri, from Mathura, from Surya Pahad in Assam, they would come. There would be Dwarapalakas. The leaders of this republic, the Karbhari Sarkar, would themselves be Dwarapalakas. So Nana Fadnis himself sat as in one of the Dwaras, would evaluate them. They would go inside and there would be a separate evaluation by Shastris, and based on their knowledge, they would get a certain award. or a certain price. Why was this done? This was done to regenerate our ancient Ghatika traditions on a nationwide scale. Nobody has heard of Shravan Ramana. In 1818, when the British took over finally Pune, etc., this system was stopped. It was made to continue for about 2 years. And even today, historians often refer to this as an alms giving or a Dakshina ceremony, which it clearly wasn't, with very detailed descriptions which we have. So I'll just end with this saying that we discuss a lot about interpretations of history, right? But unfortunately, in India, even the facts have not been discovered as yet. So how can we interpret or talk about facts when we don't know the facts itself? A lot of our information remains undeciphered, uninterpreted. A lot of manuscripts. I mean, I was telling you earlier, somebody said there are 1 crore manuscripts. I mean, how many of them even have been discovered? There have been great works, obviously, Sheshwalkar, Sardesai. I don't discount that. A lot of great work has happened in the past. We need to continue a tradition in the future and need to understand such great governments which really existed. Thank you.
Venkatesh, Rangan, a big thank you.
Yeah, sure.
Your work and yourself are real treasure because amongst the 40 to 50 books and authors whom I had come across in the last few years while reading and